not coming up, right? It's not coming up, right? So. It's not there.
But we're live.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to get started in a few minutes, but see a couple people are here already. Just give us a few minutes and we're going to get started. There's a button that says share screen, sharing it. Like, all right, everybody, just give us like 3 more minutes. We're going to wait until 12 o'clock to get started. Yeah, I'm saying the same thing over and over.
No.
Yeah, I'm telling it to share. I hit that.
All right, all right. Bless up, y'all. Welcome to the George Washington Carver experience. This is our first time doing a YouTube live, so obviously we are still getting some things right, and we're gonna get better as time goes on. But we for the last 7 years have been doing a an event on George Washington Carver Day. Today is January 5th. It's George Washington Carver Day. Um, he's widely known as the Peanut Man, but he's done so much more than just the peanut. And some people would argue that he's one of the most impactful people of our generation. The way that he's affected society. So what we wanted to do was honor our ancestors and just always remember the works of George Washington Carver. Hopefully, we could plant a seed in you that will help to spread the knowledge, and to also carry on some of the works that George Washington Carver was doing. Extends beyond agriculture, but we're going to get into it. At Freehaven Farms, we really hold on dearly to George Washington Carver, not just because of the work he did, but who he was. And he was a scientist, like Dr. Cynthia Hall here. He's a farmer, painter, so many things. So we're going to get into it. You want to tell them a little bit about the outline?
Yeah, so welcome everybody. If you're seeing it now or watching the recording, I'm Dr. Cynthia Hall, Freehaven Farms. So we've put together an outline about George Washington Carver. I haven't quite figured out how to share my screen on YouTube Live, so I don't think you'll be able to actually see our slides, but it's just basically some notes and some pictures that we've shared that go through George Washington Carver's life from basically birth through death and covering all the parts of his life that really led to the impactful work that he's done that Micaiah just spoke about. So we're going to still tell the story about his journey, and along the way add some reflections about how his journey that happened 100 years ago is still important today, and how we can draw lessons from what he went through, but then also what he was able to learn and teach others is still applicable today. So we're going to go through just making that correlation between his life and what we're dealing with now in 2025. So, all right, we'll get started with, his early life.
So yeah, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to put them in the chat. We're definitely going to have things open up for some discussion and conversation at the end here. Like we said, I really wish that we could share a screen because we have some great pictures to show you. But what we'll do is we're going to kind of read through our slides that we put together, and we'll have the conversation, and and then we'll give some resources of some documentaries and things that you could check out on YouTube, and see some more information about George Washington Carver. Be able to get some visuals that we wanted to share with you today. One thing that George Washington Carver, a quote that he had was, "You have to take the tools that you have at that time and do the best you can with the tools that you have at that time, and never be satisfied." But I think that speaks to this moment right now. We're gonna do the best we can with the tools that we have. We can't share screen, like I said, but we're gonna go ahead and push through this symposium that we put together.
All right. So George Washington Carver was born around 1864. So he was born into slavery. And so because of that, there's no actual record of his birth. So one of the reasons that we celebrate George Washington Carver on January 5th is that that's the day that he died. And because we don't actually know the date of his birth, that's the day that was chosen to honor him. And obviously that goes back to the atrocities of slavery during that time, that there were no records of his birth. But again, he was born around 1864 in Missouri, and was born into slavery. But at a very early age, he actually lost both of his parents. His father actually died before he was even born, and his mother shortly thereafter. And we're going to go into some detail about that in a little bit. I'm just going to give an overview of his life right now. So he was born around 1864, lost both of his parents. Go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna say we'll probably stay on this slide right here, and then if you want to give a quick overview of that, and then we'll get into the details of this, so we could just keep things in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool.
And then as a young child, even though he was born into slavery, he was very ill, and so he wasn't able to work in the fields and do much work at all. And so that allowed him to really kind of live a life of exploration and discovery. So that's a part of what he or how he became who he was, because he had that ability to explore at a young age. And then eventually, slavery ended, and he was freed. But again, he didn't have parents and he didn't have anywhere to go. So he actually stayed with his former masters because they more saw him like a son. And he stayed there until he was about 12 years old. And then after that, moved around, actually took several odd jobs, which a lot of people don't realize about his life. Most people know about the academic part, but he sort of moved around in the middle there just to be able to make his own way, and eventually became an entrepreneur and had businesses and owned land, until eventually he did settle on becoming an academic. He enrolled in college, eventually got his master's degree at Iowa State University. And then eventually he became a professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama. And that's really where um, sort of his work that most people know about as George Washington Carver began, was at Tuskegee University. And that was in 1896. And so that's just kind of the overview of his life. And he stayed at Tuskegee until his death, which we'll get into later. But that's just, the journey of his life from being born as, an enslaved child to eventually earning a master's degree and becoming a professor. So that's a pretty amazing journey. But of course, there was struggle along the way. So you want to get into that, Micaiah?
Sure. So, just looking at some of the journey, and breaking it down a little bit more. Um, you know, when the time period that George Washington Carver was born was like right at the end of the Civil War. All right. So you got to understand that, the transition that was happening at that time. So there were Africans that had been enslaved that were now beginning to see their freedom, so called. And there were a lot of systems in place that made things a real struggle for any person that was enslaved to make it out of slavery. So that's a whole nother story. We can get, deep into that. But because of that situation, what happened was while George Washington Carver was still a baby, there was these robbers, like these bandits, that came and they raided the house. And like I said, this was happening during the Civil War. So the woes of war, like a lot of houses that were kind of, either occupied or not occupied, they would become, victims of robbery. And people that were in the army, they would basically get into just being bandits and kind of drift off of the army and just be, robbing people. And so this was something that was prevalent during the Civil War. And after, I mean, excuse me, thereafter, right after the Civil War. And so one of the houses that got robbed and raided by these bandits was where the Carvers were. And so these robbers stole George Washington Carver as a baby and his mother to go sell them, resell them back into slavery, make some money on the underground slave trade that was happening at that time. So they sent them all the way to Arkansas to try to sell them on the underground slave market. And what happened was the Carvers, they had a different relationship than a lot of plantations at that time with the slaves that they had. And so what they did is they hired an ex-military person that was a bounty hunter to go and find these people. And so they ran them down. They tracked them down all the way to Arkansas. And when they got there, the mother wasn't there anymore. They never found her, but they found this baby, which was George Washington Carver. When they found him, he was really sick. He had whooping cough, and at the time, he had a brother that was on the plantation. He didn't get stolen. It was him. It was George Washington Carver as a baby and his mother that got stolen. And so when they found him, when the bounty hunter found him, he was sick. He had whooping cough. He was very sick and feeble. Never found the mother. When he came back, he ended up. This is the prelude to like kind of why his life lined up how it did. But he ended up being in the house, as you know. They have, you know, the house slaves and the field slaves. Malcolm X talks about it. But his brother was in the field, and George Washington Carver ended up in the house because he was sick, and they had to nurse him back to health. But in doing that, this Miss Carver lady, she had a real connection with this child, with this youth. And so she taught him a lot of stuff. She taught him how to read, which they weren't supposed to be doing at this time. She taught George Washington Carver how to play instruments, and just saw this kid had a brilliant mind. He was different, and took him in nature, just really schooled this kid. And at the same time, he had to do all the slave work in the house. Now, there's a lot of people that would say that during this time, because the practice that was happening at that time on the plantation was that men that worked in the house around the children, around the people that the slave master and everything, that those babies, those young boys would be castrated. Now, there's no real proof that this is what happened to George Washington Carver, but there's a lot of people that argue that this is what happened and led up to a part of the reason why he never got married and why he never had children. So I just want to say that that part is not a proven fact, but it is a practice that was happening on the plantation at that time. So there's a good chance that that's in fact how it played out. But interesting interestingly enough, that those circumstances is what really forced George Washington Carver as a young boy to be in nature. And as you can understand, not growing up with a father, his father was crushed under a cart, a lumber, like there was a lumber yard,
Mhm.
and the lumber cart crushed his dad, died while he was a baby still. And then his mother, during the kidnap, he never knew his mother. And so all he knew was the Carvers, the slave masters. And they coddled this youth, and he found so much peace in the woods, in nature. And so he would be out there, they said, to find solitude. You know what I'm saying? Like, we go through hard times now, but we really can't imagine this trauma to this young person, and how much time he spent in the woods at that time, and really learning and discovering and understanding the ecosystem. All of that happened because of the circumstances. So I just think that one thing is that we need to remember that as we go through things, it's not like what George Washington Carver went through at that time. And the other thing is to understand that even through the hardest, the most crazy trauma, he was still able to find balance, center himself, and find strength to push through when he went into nature and rehabilitated. So we could just draw from that right now.
Mhm.
As we go through certain things, man, as we go through our hard times, we got to sometimes find solitude, find peace, in nature, and come up with solutions, even if it involves healing ourselves in some way. But he came up with all his solutions. Even when we talk about the peanut later on, he came up with all the ideas, all the solutions, anything, during his time of solitude in nature. And so that's a lesson right there.
Definitely. Um, so yeah, he definitely saw struggle. Like Micaiah said, more struggle than we could possibly fathom in our lives. But he was able to persevere, and as he was growing up again until age 12, he was living in the Carver's home, and he was being taught. The wife taught him how to read. He learned how to paint, like Micaiah said, he learned how to play instruments, and it got to a point where they realized he needed more. Um, he needed more education, and he needed to be around other children, right? So he was basically being homeschooled. That's kind of what we would call it now, in a very, very isolated environment. So the Carvers, basically um, identified a school that he could attend, that was a school that was open for other Black children in Missouri. And, they contacted the school and said, hey, we're going to send our young George over to attend this school. Except the school was 8 miles away, and we're talking about the end of the 1800s. So he had to walk, and he walked all the way to that school, which was 8 miles away by himself as a 12-year-old. And that's crazy, right? We wouldn't let our 12-year-old walk around the corner, right? In many cases. And so, they sent him off to go to the school, but to leave. He left their home like for good. So it was a farewell at the age of 12 to go attend this school. And so he did that in pursuit of education and just another life. And so when he did that, he left, he walked, and he went to live with this new family. He lived at this new school for Black children at the age of 12. And that's where, he really was able to hone in on his education and focus on learning. And so, did you want to add some stuff to that?
Yeah. So, man, we are having a conversation and we're kind of just going through this time period that this man had on his journey, but each time period was so deep and so loaded and so much was happening. And you know when he went to this school, like Cynthia was saying, you got to understand, this young man walked these 8 miles every day to school. But the family that was running the school, you got situations like me and Cynthia, we doing Free Haven Farms. You had a couple that was running this school. Okay. Don't think they were getting paid a lot. We're talking about real service driven people at this time. All right. So the people that were running the school was a couple called Andrew and Mariah Watkins. All right. Now they ran the school and they saw something in this youth. And so what they did is they opened their home up. That means that they took another mouth to feed into their house. And they had no problem doing it. And they made it so that now George was in a situation that he never knew his black mother. She was taken from him as a young person. And so he developed a strong relationship with this Mariah Watkins, a very strong relationship. And she, like the Carver lady, saw that there was something special in this kid and his mind and the way he think and the way he moved. And there was something special about this Mariah, right? So this Mariah lady, she really held on to a lot of ancestral knowledge. Okay, she was what we might call a bush doctor. She was able to use plants. She was, first of all, a midwife to the entire community. So that's all the white babies and all the black babies, any babies in that area that were born came under this Mariah Watkins. So she knew how to bring life into the world, but she also had a very high knowledge and understanding about plant medicine and how to use plants to heal anything. He said that he learned from her that these plants could be used to heal any ailment, any sickness, anything, and that the things derived from the plants could cure things that were challenging us as humans in our health, right? And he learned that. He saw that firsthand. He helped her. He worked with her. And it got to a point that his mind was so sharp that Andrew Watkins, who was her husband and ran the school, realized like he couldn't give this kid no more game. Like a teacher will tell you about a kid in the class that's just so sharp, they testing you and pushing you. So he realized like, man, I don't even know anymore to teach this kid. He needs to seek higher learning and higher education. And he knew that there was a school in Kansas, and there was George had a way of befriending people anywhere he went.
Mm-hmm.
White people, black people, old people, young people, poor people, rich people, it didn't matter. He was a humanitarian, and he would find a commonality in any other human being and find a way to, and he would befriend people anywhere. So he was able to get on a cart that was passing through the Watkins school, right? That was going to Kansas, and encouragement from Andrew and Mariah to continue learning. And he also said at this time that Mariah was the first person that told him that he had to find a way to use his God-given talents, his mind, to help his people. And he never even thought of that. And that was the first time that seed was planted in his mind. And so, anyways, they helped him hitch a ride, get in his cart, and go to Kansas to be able to learn beyond what they can teach him and give him at this one room schoolhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another piece of the journey. But just wanted to have a little bit of a deeper conversation about that time that he used to walk 8 miles to the one room schoolhouse to learn at 10, possibly 12 years old, very young, very committed, very determined, very resilient. And just yeah, it's just the way he got started.
Yeah, and so during that time, when he left Missouri and went to Kansas, that was when he, was sort of out on his own as a young man, and you know, took odd jobs and started a business and ended up buying some land. So he was on this whole journey, because he was trying to make it at that time. He was no longer the inquisitive little boy that somebody would feed. He was a young man by this time, so he had to earn money in order to survive. So, he was very industrious, as they would say, and he was really able to do just about anything. So he did, again, a lot of odd jobs, ended up saving enough money to buy land. But eventually, again, he was still focused on his goals, which was education. He ended up getting admitted into Highland University in Kansas. And so he was going to attend Highland University, and he literally showed up. You got to remember, this is still 1800s. He showed up and they realized, oh, this is a black man, because his name was George Washington Carver. There's no way to know back then. They didn't have that box on the application of what's your race. It was just, if you could fill out a college application, I'm sure they just assumed you were probably white. Anyway, they didn't know until he showed up. And then they said, oh, no, you can't come here. You're black. You can't come. And so he wasn't able to attend, even after he was admitted and like showed up to campus. But it's George Washington Carver, so he just like, okay, and kept it moving, and kind of did some other things. And this was the time period now where he started to explore art more. And it was really just because he was kind of encouraged to go more that route, right? That like as a black man, no one's really going to take you seriously as an academic, but if you do art, play music and things like that, that's going to be more like in your lane. And so that was what he did. He eventually attended Simpson College, and he was actually studying art. He was studying painting, and he was also playing the piano.
I wanted to add something about that.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was in Kansas, when he was in school, and when he was trying to get into school in Kansas, um, like Cynthia said, he realized a roadblock that they weren't gonna let him in there because he was black, because he was an African American. It was also at this time that he eyewitnessed for the first time a black man being lynched
Mm.
by a mob and burned alive and hung. And it really messed the it messed him up like it would anybody. And he was like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really looking for an opportunity. And at the same time, he heard that there was a school in Kansas that would accept black people, that would actually let someone enroll that was black. And so that's where he set off on his journey to find this school that was going to let a black person get in there. And that's how he found Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the man has so many skills and talents, like nobody even knew one thing of that he did of another, because he was so talented at painting that no one knew he was a scientist, so talented at science that no one knew he painted. And that's just how talented this man was. But when he went to Simpson, like Cynthia said, he went to go be learn how to paint. And he wanted to enroll in this class, and the teacher, the professor, this woman, I forgot her name, that was the professor, Etta, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
She was new to the university like him. And so it was really her kind of going out on a limb to allow him to be accepted into the class, because what would happen at that time is that any student that wanted to come into art class would have to present a portfolio that showed all their paintings and all their work and stuff. And he just had like a book with some sketches and stuff and was just like, just what, you know. And so she's like, what? And she's like, man, but she really saw some, like other people saw something in him and gave him an opportunity. And when he got there and started to learn from her, he blew her mind away. He blew everyone's mind away how well he painted and was able to paint. But the thing was, like I said, he would befriend people, so people would try to look out for him and give him game. You see what I'm saying? And so Etta was telling him, like, look, you're not gonna be able to make no money and support yourself financially as a black man with painting, like with art. But every picture you draw and paint is about plants. It's about nature. It's about a bee, a bird, a flower, a plant. Like you need to be in agriculture. You need to be in botany. And you need to go to this school over here. I know some folks over at the school over here, they'll let you get in. This school is now known as the University of Iowa University, Iowa State.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the first black person to ever attend this college. You know what I'm saying? And then, Cynthia tell you a little bit more about that journey there. But yeah, it was just interesting this whole time, his educational journey, how he just followed the calling. You know what I'm saying? Followed his talent and his calling. And he would always let his light shine. Like, this is what I do. This is what I do good. This is what, you know what I mean? And he didn't care how it was received. He didn't care if she would laugh at his sketchbook. He said he was persistent. She said no at first. Said he was persistent. Every time he would go to certain places, they say no, he was persistent until they said yes. And that's something we could learn from George Washington Carver, man. You may not get a yes the first time. That school that you want to go into may not want you there. That don't mean that you can't go to school. I'm thinking about kids going to college. That don't mean that you can't. You just got to find the right fit. Because as soon as he got into a school that liked him, that wanted him there, then he got all these opportunities. You're going to see how this thing plays out in the end. It's crazy. But you have to go where you're wanted and where you're loved and where you're appreciated and where you're valued and where you're received. And those places may not be where you originally intend to go. On that journey, your ancestors, the universe, the powers that be may point you in another direction. But you got to be humble enough to hear the message. And two, you have to be so mission driven. That's what they said. This man was mission driven, that it didn't matter the vehicle that he got on to get there. It didn't matter the route. It was just the mission and how I can complete it. And so that's what we have to be like Carver, is that mission driven, that it doesn't matter how things change and move. We can just be on our mission and get to where we going regardless. All right.
Yeah. No, that's really deep. And I think something that, like you said, we all can learn even beyond school, with relationships, with jobs, with friends, all that it always applies. And the other thing is, you don't know who you're going to be in front of, and always put your best foot forward, because his professor at Simpson College, this Etta Budd, that he ended up impressing, it was her father that was a professor, that was a horticultural professor at Iowa State. And that's how she, got him into the school. He didn't know that going into Simpson College to study art and piano, that his professor, this woman, which I'm sure that was groundbreaking at that time, was going to have a father in, the main university at the time. So you just never know who you're going to be in front of. Always put your best foot forward. And it's still who that definitely is always true.
One quote I'll share with you before we kind of go off this slide from that time period. He said, I would not let the disappointments of life define me. So that's what we have to always hold on to, because we're gonna meet disappointments. We're gonna
Mhm.
have, failures. We're gonna fall short, but you can't ever let that define you. Stay on your mission.
Absolutely. So yeah, he ended up enrolling at Iowa State University. He was the first Black student ever to be admitted, ever to graduate. Um, and like
Got
Micaiah
his
said,
masters.
we're gonna somehow figure out a way to share some of these images with you guys, maybe in a separate video we put together. But there's a picture of him in a room at Iowa State. I mean, a huge like ballroom. And when I tell
Wow.
you, the room was just completely filled, and everyone was white except for him. And you can, the picture points him out, but it's just like, and again, this is in the 1800s. It's hard for us to wrap our brains around that. Having the strength and the fortitude to like still exist in that moment and be strong and to be successful is amazing. Um, but anyway, he eventually went to Iowa State University, and that was where he studied horticulture. He got a bachelor's degree and then eventually got a master's degree. Um, he wasn't allowed to pursue a doctorate at that time, so he got the highest degree that he could, which was a master's degree. Um, and then they kept him on as an administrator um, at the university. So this again was groundbreaking. This is in 1896. So he was going to become a professor at Iowa State University, but he got a letter in the mail before he took that position. And that letter was from Booker T. Washington. And that letter was asking, more like begging, for him to come and join his brand new Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Um, and so, late 1800s, most of the HBCUs, historically Black college and universities, were being established at that time, right? From the late um, 1860s through early 1900s. And so Tuskegee was being started at that time in 1896 by Booker T. Washington. And he's like, I need you down here to teach these lessons.
And to add to that, to
Mm-hmm.
establish the agricultural department.
Yes.
So along with what Cynthia was saying, all the institutions at that time in the South, you got to understand the South and the situation, which we're going to get into about sharecropping. Um, Agriculture, any school that was established had an agriculture department. They had to, because it
Mm-hmm.
was such a part of society at that time. And so Booker T knew that he needed somebody that knew the science of agriculture, but it was a Black man.
Mm-hmm.
They could be a scientist that understood the science of agriculture, but it was a Black man to help him start this Black Initiative University, Tuskegee. And George Washington Carver was literally the only person on the planet at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, like I said, he put out a call to him and was like, listen, man, please, I can't pay you. I can't give you no money. You got to understand, he was getting paid already. He was making good money over there at Washington. He had a great lab,
At
great
Iowa.
assist. I mean, at Iowa, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Great assistance. He had a great support system, nice facility. He was getting paid. He done broke the doors down, and the white folks really accepted him, revered him, respected him, loved him. He didn't, like, he was comfortable. And then that's why what Booker T was saying was real, because he didn't sugarcoat it. He was like, you about to come into struggle. You about to come into a place of work. You about to come. I can only give you $1,000 a year
A year.
for your salary. Like, you ain't gonna make no money, but we need you, and the work that you do is gonna help our people. And you got to remember that Mariah Watkins planted that seed in his mind when he was at the Run Room Schoolhouse. She said, you got to find a way to use your beautiful mind. You're special. to help your people.
Mm-hmm.
And so he literally said when he wrote back to Booker T, like, I'll take it. He was like, I've been waiting for this opportunity to find a way to help the greatest amount of our people at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this as the way to do that. And so he jumped on the train and he was gone. And he went to Tuskegee. And it was, boy, it was, I don't know if he knew what he was getting into.
It's a culture shock.
He did, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He ain't never been down south in the Mason Dixon before that. So he didn't understand what the South was all about, you know. And so, like, yeah, it was a complete cultural shock when he saw sharecropping
Mm-hmm.
up in person. It blew his mind away, and he looked at our people. He looked at their situation, and and when I say the situation of sharecropping, where you have to produce a certain amount of produce on this land to pay your rent to be here, and any other extra you have is some money that you might be able to make for yourself situation. And he's like, man, and you, because of what's going on with the soil, like he said we could do better.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, these people could do better for themselves, and I just gotta show them. And so that became like, literally, he was like, boom, this is this, I'm here, I'm bought in.
Yeah, so he had a new mission. He went down to Tuskegee Institute at the time, in Alabama, to start an agricultural department. But like Micaiah said, Booker T really put in him this need to save agriculture in the South, and especially for Black farmers at that time. And so he took the opportunity and he went down there, and not only was he surprised at the plight of the Black farmer, he was also surprised to see the facilities that he had at Tuskegee Institute, because he's coming from Iowa State where he had a lab. He had nothing. This man gave him a room for a laboratory and no budget. And so George Washington Carver salvaged his first laboratory materials, which, again, as a scientist now, and I'm a science professor, and starting at a university, they give you a lab and you have, basic lab materials in there. If you take over an existing lab, if it's a brand new lab, then they give you money to buy, your beakers and they gave him nothing. So he had to get it literally out of the trash. He repurposed trash, garbage, to make a laboratory, and he did it successfully. He was able to make all of his lab equipment, and start this laboratory where he trained, other Black scientists, these students coming through the university, to be like high level scientists. So that in and of itself was amazing. But then also he was given the task, again, not just to teach these students at the university, but to help the community at large. So Booker T. Washington tasked him with creating an outreach program that was going to help the Black farmers in the state of Alabama. But this was a really, really big challenge for a couple of reasons. For one, all of these farmers were very, very poor, right? So they couldn't necessarily travel to Tuskegee University to attend a lecture, to come to, learn from George Washington Carver. So he had to develop this mobile station that was going to be able to travel from farm to farm and teach people these lessons that were going to help them save their farms. But then the other huge barrier was that they were illiterate, because they were enslaved before then. And now they're sharecroppers and they didn't have the knowledge. They didn't know how to read. So he's like, how am I going to teach these people about things like crop rotation, about things like nitrogen fixation, and they don't know how to read? So he had to be very creative. Um, and so he met people where they were, both literally and figuratively. So he, developed this mobile education center that was a wagon that he drove
The
around,
Jessup wagon.
the Jessup wagon, and then had to develop these teaching materials that were like picture based and be, to teach in a way that, again, was understandable and relatable to these farmers that didn't have any formal education.
Yeah, it's deep.
It really was deep.
So, like, just to piggyback on what Sint was saying, when he was at Tuskegee, he was daunted with so many tasks. Beyond teaching all the classes he had to teach, he had to establish departments. He was responsible for the beautification of the grounds. I mean, he
That's
was
right.
healing people. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? They were coming into his office. He was writing out prescriptions. And then he had to go out and do this outreach work, in which he had to teach a very detailed, little complex system of nitrogen fixation to folks that didn't know how to read. And so he figured it out. You know what I'm saying? And it's just amazing. And it's something that we gotta always remember. And the thing is, like, when he moved down to Tuskegee, he wasn't welcome with open arms. Like, hey, welcome, brother. Like, that's what he would have wanted it to be. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the other professors there were jealous. They were jealous that he was coming with all this fame and popularity and coming from the white, you know what I'm saying, Iowa, and he wasn't in the trenches like them. And you know what I mean? There was a lot of hate that was shown on him. Wasn't he didn't get all the support that you would think he would have gotten. Not to mention that he went down south and then now had to deal with that cultural shock and stuff. So there's just a lot of things that were playing out at the time that really could have wore anybody out. But George Washington was very, like we said, very mission driven. You know what I'm saying? And so he didn't let any of that deter him. One thing I was going to talk about. Well, that's okay. We're going to get more into that in the next part. That was it.
So some of the lessons that he was teaching these farmers, because all right, now at this time, it's the early 1900s, and what we were seeing in the US was soil degradation. The soil was being depleted from the cotton industry, right? That's what most people know about slavery, know about, down south at that time, is that they were growing cotton, and enslaved people had to pick cotton, right? That's what most people associate with that time period. But what they don't know about cotton as a crop is that it takes a lot of nitrogen out of the soil, right? And it planting this cotton year after year after year. I mean, this was going on for centuries in the same soil without replenishing it, had completely like destroyed the soil ecosystem. The nutrients in the soil were depleted, the organisms in the soil were depleted, and the soil was just trash. And one of the things that came with that was infestation. And there was this boll weevil, that's an insect that was just eating through all the cotton. And that's what was destroying the crops and really causing these farmers to go poor and go hungry. And so they weren't able to pay the sharecropping fee and have enough money to survive on their own. So they were really, really struggling with ultimately the depleted soil. So that was like the root, and that's what George Washington Carver figured out. It's not about like giving them money or a band-aid. He was like, let's get to, no pun intended, the root of the problem. So he was all about fixing the soil. And the way to fix the soil that was like doable was to plant things that were going to replenish specifically the nitrogen in the soil. And some of those crops were sweet potatoes, soybeans, and peanuts. All of those plants are nitrogen fixers. And this is where his identity as the peanut man came from, because he was encouraging the farmers to rotate their crops, not just plant cotton in the same place year after year, but now to add these other crops into that, rotation of crops in order to replenish the soil. So, but the problem at that time was trying to convince the farmers and convince really the agricultural community that planting these crops made sense.
Yeah.
What can we do with all of this, all these peanuts and all these sweet potatoes and soybeans? What even are those?
Yeah, this is a deep conversation right here. Let me
Mhm.
break a couple things down on this. So, at the time when George Washington Carver went to the South, there were about 5 million black farmers. All right. Like I said, this is coming off the backs of plantations, and now we got sharecropping.
Mhm.
And you had about 5 million black farmers, and only 1/5 of them own their own land.
Mm.
So you got 5 million black farmers, only a fifth of their own their land. So that means all these other millions of farmers are sharecropping. So they're literally in this situation where they're forced to plant the crop that the market wants to sell,
Mhm.
which is cotton at that time, coming off of the plantation slavery era. That's really all the market knew. So they were monocropping, growing mass amounts of cotton over and over and over again in the same area. And even this is when synthetic fertilizers started to be introduced into making this cotton flourish.
Mhm.
And so between the monocropping and the synthetic fertilization to try to increase production of cotton, like Cynthia said, that the soil was completely depleted. If you've ever heard of the Dust Bowl
Yep.
and a time period where there was like dust and wind and all this that really devastated, it was an ecological, an ecological disaster
Mhm.
because of these farming practices. You could look this stuff up.
Mhm.
And so what George Washington Carver realized is that the problem, I needed to fix the problem of the depleted soil. You see what I'm saying? Of the depleted soil and the sharecropping. This is how I can have what we call applied science.
Mm.
So now he's taking science to another level where he's able to take it out of the laboratory, take the research and the numbers and the formulas, and actually put it to use to where it can be helpful and useful to society, in particular his community. And this is where he challenged science.
Mm.
And his work continues to challenge science and scientists to have applied science that could actually improve the living situation of people. Now, the thing is that there was other political plays in motion at the time that really put the brakes on this work that he was doing. Okay. There were limitations to how much this was going to be able to affect community in a very positive way. So understand, like Cynthia was saying, he needed to come up with these inventions. What inspired George Washington to sit down and come up with over 300 inventions for the peanut is because there were embargoes set at that time against all other crops. And really, the only thing that was being allowed to be grown was cotton because of the way that it was subsidized. Because a lot of the things that you see even happen in agriculture right now, with a lot of major crops like grains and corns and and soybeans and things. So there's a lot of stuff that happens right now in big farming practices. But what happened was these embargoes were set up, and so George Washington Carver had to try to prove to the powers that be that the peanut was going to be useful in crop rotation. He couldn't just show the scientific part and showing how this can fix the soil and make agriculture right again and fix really everything that is our problem right now. We're growing food down here down south, but it could also create more money. All right, and it's useful in these certain ways. And he has such a convincing argument. His science was so compelling. Like basically they knew he was right, but they also knew that this was going to empower a certain group of people that would they were trying to oppress. So a lot of his work that he was doing with the peanut, it faced political pushback that would only let it go but so far. All right. And what he created the Jessup wagon for, to go and educate people and give them the power. Now I'm giving you control of your situation, the power to create income. And you got to understand that him going there with Booker T. Washington, him and Booker T. Washington had an understanding. They had an agreement that for Black people to fix their political situation, right, their civil rights and all that, that they had to first create an economic foothold on their situation, and then they would be able to successfully address some of the political issues.
Mhm.
And that a way for their community to establish an economic foothold in society at that time was with the work that they were doing with agriculture, and creating a way that farmers and growers of food could actually produce more income, could create more money, could almost print their own money by using science in agriculture integrated to create more income and economic foothold in society at that time. This thing is deep.
It's deep. And not just that. So not only did he empower them to, create these or to grow these crops that could generate money, but he also was helping them to figure out how to create better nutrition for themselves, because these farmers were not only poor, but they were malnourished and they were sick and they were hungry.
Mm.
And he said, you can grow nutritious food. I mean, just imagine having to tell farmers that they can grow their own food. Because again, farming at that time had really shifted to just cotton. And then you got to understand, again, I don't want to get off track, but then you got to understand what was happening in the North with manufacturing and with, you know, all of the jobs that were going up there. So all the cotton was being shipped up north to the mills to, create different products. So literally the whole country was based on this economy that was based on cotton. And so he was trying to shift that. So one of the things that he came up with, along with like different inventions, was actually a recipe book. He actually created a cookbook from these different crops. Okay. From again, soybeans, sweet potatoes, and peanuts were like his three main crops because they help to put nitrogen back into the soil. One of the things that George Washington Carver invented was soy milk. What? Who knew that? He was like, you can grow your own protein and you don't have to eat animals. You can do that. And not on some wanting to be what, but because it's cheaper, because it's actually better for the environment, it's better for the soil. So coming up with plant-based protein was George Washington Carver's work. That sounds like, going to Whole Foods and whatever in the 21st century, but he was doing that way back then as a way to, again, empower people, empower these Southern Black farmers. So that's just amazing to see that, and it like come full circle, over 100 years later.
Yeah, we wouldn't have no soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, all that stuff without the works of George Washington Carver. You wouldn't be eating no veggie burgers. No C10, no none of that. All right. All these products, right, was the science of George Washington Carver. Now, don't get me wrong, all these products ain't good because the way they still taint and process food. But if you understand the science, this was deep. The science of what he was teaching and discovered, that will never change.
Mm-mm.
Okay, and so you'll see certain, we've seen certain people in our day even that have expounded on these works and shown how we could use these plants, what I'm saying, to really heal ourselves and make ourselves strong. One thing that he did at that time too, that we're about to get into here, with his work with these plants beyond feeding yourself, all right, was, and you got so just to pull something back during this time period, George Booker T. Washington transitioned, and there was another person who started to run Tuskegee. Mm-hmm. After Booker T. Washington transitioned, George Washington Carver went within, and he went back in the laboratory, and he told the new director, "Listen, I'm not teaching as much as I used to. And all the outreach work that I was doing, like I said, really politics kind of put a halt on what he was doing with the peanut and what he was doing with the farmers at that time. So after Booker T. Washington transitioned right around the same time, and they got a new director, he said, "I'm going back in the laboratory." And that's when he went in the laboratory, and they say he had a talk with God. He would talk to God when he was in the woods through through nature, and he asked for some guidance about how to come up with solutions through nature for his people's problems. And he said God told him, "You're too big of a question. You gotta make it smaller. You're a small man, small guy, small question." And so he said that's when he said, "Well, how about the peanut?" And he said, "That's still an infinite question, but I'm gonna help you out there." And then he said that's where he really tapped into just coming up with ideas on how to extract and make all these inventions out of the peanut. You know what I'm saying? And so he was on that type of time. But after that work with the Jessup wagon and the work to help the farmers kind of stopped, he went back into the laboratory to just create and just invent. And he came up with so many different inventions that he didn't even patent them because he wasn't trying to get money. He actually understood that I have a short period of time that I'm alive here on the earth. I have a certain connection to nature, and I could invent and create and more if I don't spend time trying to run around and get these patents and make money off of this. So some people discredit him about not going and getting the bag because he's responsible for so much that we have in our society that if he moved a certain way, he could have had so much fame and fortune. You would know him way more than the Peanut Man right now. Um, he had people that were trying to hire him, like Thomas Edison at the time.
Bell
And we
Labs.
talk about give him millions, comparatively, millions and millions of dollars to come work with their company. He had Henry Ford that became his friend. He befriended him, but the reason why he befriended him was for his knowledge. You know what I'm saying? He showed him everything he needed to know about the soy plant. Matter of fact, it was in 1937 that he kind of really built this relationship with Henry Ford. Henry Ford built him a laboratory, and he asked him to come live with him and work on this laboratory to develop science where he can make automobile parts out of plants. And he knew that George Washington Carver had 40 years of knowledge and research on the soy plant and studying how to make products out of plants. And so he built a laboratory for him specifically, moved him onto his property, and had him there for several years, where he was able to create so many different automobile parts out of plants, out of soy. And they actually made a soy car. They created a soy car. You could look up this. You could look this up. They created a soy car. All right. And Henry Ford was able to show he would hit it with a hammer, hit it with an axe, and it wouldn't even break or nothing. It wouldn't get no dent. And it was 1,000 pounds lighter than the metal car. And he was able to show how effective this thing was. It didn't go all the way. After George Washington Carver left living with Henry Ford, he got sick. Actually, he got sick, and then he went home, and he transitioned a little bit after that. It was 1943 that he transitioned, so it was a little bit after that that he transitioned. But he did a lot to like I said, to affect science even beyond just what he was able to do with the food and the plants. And a lot of his knowledge and his technology, like we said, is still being used to this day. You got to think this was back in the 40s that he figured out how to take plants and make automobile parts.
That's amazing.
So anyways, we just got to really, really respect this man, and I think really understand that the sky is the limit. Like, there's no reason we cannot accomplish. We go through stuff, we have challenges, we have pushback, but it's never as much as it was for George Washington Carver. It was never that bad for us. All right. And then to understand, like I said, just what happened through the generations, and then what advancements of technology that we have that this man didn't have. He didn't have an airplane. He didn't have the internet. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have a cell phone. and he was able to accomplish. He didn't even have a laboratory when he went to Tuskegee,
Mhm.
and he was able to accomplish all these things. So it's like, what's our excuse? When the man went to Kansas, he didn't have a job. He didn't have no money. He just wanted to get educated, and he got busy. He was active, and through that he was able to get all these odd jobs, own laundry business, figure out how to buy some land and own some real estate and make money off of real estate. He put the work in. He was self-taught. He was self-educated. He never felt like there was any limitation to anything that he wanted to accomplish. He believed that there was power in the universe and power within himself that he just had to tap into and connect, and then produce whatever it is that he felt was necessary to produce. And I'm just saying that he's, to me, the ultimate example on how much we could accomplish in a lifetime,
Mhm.
how much we can take. And the thing to always remember about his attitude and about what he said and the way that he lived his life, what he was able to do and how he wanted everyone else to live it, even when he was working with the farmers down south. He would say, start where you are,
Mhm.
do the best you can with the tools that you have at that time, make something of it, and never be satisfied. That was like his line, yo.
Mhm.
Start where you are, do the best you can with the tools you have, make it happen. But don't stop there. Don't
Right.
be satisfied. Keep
Keep
learning,
going.
keep growing, keep making it scale. Keep, huh? And that's it, man. Like, we all have our own mission. He was a mission driven person. We all have our own mission, our own calling. Why we here? You know what I'm saying? And we all are gonna face these times that we, you know what I'm saying, that we just feel like we hitting the wall and the challenges. And nah, man, we gotta remember the works. We gotta remember the life, the legacy of George Washington Carver. And we gotta dig in, and we gotta make it happen.
Absolutely. No, we give thanks for George Washington Carver on this day, January 5th, every year. Like Micaiah said, we've been doing this now for 7 years. Every single year, in some way, shape, or form, we honor our ancestor. Um, and, this was George Washington Carver Day was declared, I think, in 1948 by President Truman. He was the first African American to have a national day, a day that was honored for him. Again, we've kind of, lost track of that as a country, and don't really, have this day on our calendar like we do for like Martin Luther King Day, for example. So that's why we feel so necessary to still, take the time and pay our respects and share this information with as many people, and in many different ways. Like, we've done this through many different platforms over the years. And really, it's just to be able to touch as many people as possible. So, we really feel strongly about um, honoring our ancestors. And so, although we don't have direct lineage from George Washington Carver, he's extremely influential in our lives. We throughout the year, just in like everyday conversation, we'll just bring up George Washington Carver. Like, we don't just do this for George Washington Carver Day, but we really do try to embody, his spirit and what he was about, which was about helping his people. And so that lesson was really impactful for me, especially as a Black scientist, because although I didn't get my degree in 1896, I still faced some of the same challenges that he did. In graduate school, even as a professor, I was in 2008 the first Black professor in my department, not the whole university like he was, but in my department. And even to this day, they have not hired a Black professor since then, and I've left that university. But so it's still some of the same stories that we go through as Black scientists. And one of the um, big lessons that I took from him is this idea of using our talents and our brains to help our people. And so part of the shift that I've had in my career and in my life is influenced by him. And taking my work, being primarily at the university and being now on the farm and being, about spreading this information to our people through these platforms. That's very important to me as an individual, but to us as a family and as a business. So we thank you guys for tuning in today, taking your time on this Sunday to join us. And if you're watching this after, we broadcast this live, then again, thank you for tapping in and just for, learning about George Washington Carver. I think is important.
Yeah, and please, y'all, spread knowledge. I see some beautiful comments here. Thank you for the comments. If you have a comment or a question, please type it in the chat. I'll try and answer it right now. But if you just want to make a comment, that's cool. I see some beautiful comments here. And man, that's what we're trying to do, is pass the ladder. That's what we call it. Because now once you have the ladder or the knowledge, you have to pass the ladder too.
Mm-hmm.
So each one teach one. Things that you learned today that resonated with you, that stick with you, that what I'm saying, you could draw from, that educated, inspired, motivated you, whatever. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it. That's free. It don't cost nothing to share. But there's blessings on the other side of it every time. So share what you learn. What I'm saying? Help someone else connect to George Washington Carver, his story. Don't stop here. This is just the tip of the iceberg we feeding you. It's a deep ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Go on this little YouTube platform and look up, George Washington Carver documentaries, right?
There's a few.
And you're going to see some good docs. Some of them ain't as good as others, but you're going to find some. But the point is, whatever platform you use, however it is that you continue to feed yourself and educate yourself, do it. And don't stop learning about this man. What I'm saying? Not just him, but other people that have kind of done the work before us and found a level of success. Let's not stop learning from them, because we face so many of the same situations and challenges now that there's a lot to learn, and then apply it to life now. What I'm saying? That's all we're doing, is trying to apply what we've learned in our life now. That's how we got to Freehaven Farms. You see what I'm saying? But listen, guys, this isn't our last live.
It's our first.
It is our first.
But it'll get better
on YouTube.
And we'll do it again.
So like I said, little technical difficulty at the beginning. We're gonna get the camera set up, the exterior camera. We'll get the microphones, and we'll learn how to share the screen a little bit better. Next time it'll get better. But like George Washington Carver said, start where you are, do the best you can with the tools you have at that time, make something of it, and never be satisfied. We're not satisfied, but we're gonna keep working.
That's right. So until the next time, we'll see you guys. Again, enjoy the rest of your day. If you have questions, you can leave a question in the chat and we will see it and we can respond. You can always email us, freehavenfarms@gmail.com. We look forward to connecting with y'all more in the future, in this new year in 2025.
Yeah, we're gonna try to do a live every month. I'm gonna try to do a live every month, leading up to the springtime. So y'all stay tuned for the next lives. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe to our email.
Yes.
So when we send out emails, you get the updates. And other than that, take a time to reflect and enjoy yourself on this great George Washington Carver Day.
All right, peace, y'all.
Stay rooted.
Keep growing.
Blast.